Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. I am your host, Eddie Phillips, and I welcome you on this Thursday for another great episode. I'm in my office in my house, and I'm here as I am every Thursday to provide you and those who join us with a dose of Black history and knowledge that is not often shared. I went on earlier, kind of little reason why it was a little bit after to try to get enough people and make sure I hit enough of these Black history sites and places online, because what I'm learning as I do more and more on social media, what I'm learning is that people are everywhere but nowhere. In other words, you can get a lot of people to follow foolery. There's a lot of stuff out here that is completely anathema to proper logic and understanding and facts. And it seems that it entices people. And a lot of people join programs and groups, and they follow things based on the desire, right, to just, I guess, feel included. And a lot of that stuff is not good for you, right? It's not helping you. And so I went on a little bit just before the broadcast. Excuse me. Before the broadcast, to just try to reach some people and make sure we get a good audience as we go through this subject tonight. The subjects that we're going to hit tonight, I know for a fact, are not taught clearly, properly in schools. I would dare say in some colleges, and because there's no emphasis and no desire to levy understanding and facts and to delve into things. We are allowing ourselves to be marginalized when we don't go out and seek knowledge and facts and understanding. And so I wanted tonight to really, really get into this, right? Into this thing. And I'm kind of giving some time, telling people, come on in, share, get your friends in here. I'm telling you tonight, what we're getting ready to hit is going to hit a lot of different things. And we're going to come back to some things that are actually going on right now that are important, and how all of that has affected where we are. But I'm giving this time right now because I want you to get out there, encourage people to join the live broadcast. I think it's important that we get as many people as we can tonight, because I want your questions and I want your thoughts and I want your interactions on what we're talking about here. because we need to do better. You hear me say that a lot. You hear me say that an awful lot to a lot of people, that we need to do better. And so I gave a little bit of time, but I'm going to go for it. We got 3 people in here. I don't know who I see 2. I see Sean Anthony. Good to see you, Sean Anthony. Thank you. That's my son. I know Teddy is in the background. He's always in the background watching. Eric, hey, good to see you. Good to see you. So we're going to get into this. You know, I think that some people will just have to catch on later and they'll drop their questions as we go. Earlier this morning, I was up and I was looking at some information, and I'm creating a course right now. And what I was doing this morning is I was trying to figure out how is it, and I'm going to share my screen a lot tonight on this program. How is it that we are where we are right now? How is it that we're Data, good to see you. How is it that we are where we are? Why do we keep going into this this repetitive foolery? And that seems to be my word of the day lately. But foolery, right? We you know, last week I shared with you all, or it may have been the week before, I shared with you all this picture of how they see us, right? When the argument was being made about the Egyptians, and it's not just the Egyptians. When we look at the arguments that have been made against our culture, and I speak specifically of people of color, people who are part of the African diaspora and have our ancestors are out of Africa, and the denial of these facts in modern academia, in society, and the manipulation of it. And then I've talked to you all about the fact that, you know, we send our kids to school, to brick and mortar, and we send them to get an education, but we don't validate the education that they're getting. We don't ask them questions. We don't learn with them. And because of that, we're not growing with them. And now we have the world who looks at anything that is of color or of African descent as something negative. And we are going back or regressing to a time that none of us really want to repeat. We assume that slavery, chattel slavery, happened in the back. It just happened, right? But it didn't happen like that. It was a systematic approach that eventually enslaved thousands, if not millions of people. Because slavery wasn't just the body, it was the mind. It was the culture. It was the society. And we haven't seemed to grasp that enough to grow out of it. And so I wanted to talk about some very important things tonight. Some very important things tonight. And I think the best place to start, right? The best place to start is to go to these creation stories, right? Even in the creation stories and the things that we have been taught, rather they be from the Bible, rather they be from other cultures, religions, everybody has a creation story. And these stories are passed down through generations in religion, in history. And it tells us how man was created. And according to these stories, rather if you look at the Bible, God created Adam and Eve, and on the sixth day of creation, he created them in his own image. And he formed them to be the word I guess I would use to guide and to lead what is on this earthly plane. The creation story in the Bible says God breathed life into Adam's nostrils, and he gave him the ability to think and to reason above all of the other creation on the planet. And science and religion have argued that this doesn't make any sense. They called it special creation. That was the name for it. That's the historical name, special creation. And if you've never heard that, special creation was something that was created in order to bias. I'm going to go further into this as we go into this. Because special creation has been said that it is the belief, in accordance with the book of Genesis, right? It is the belief that every species and individual created by God was formed in its totality. Well, the Bible doesn't tell you that. But if you're going to argue Darwinism, creationism, evolution, you have to make these creation stories, right, wrong. You have to something has to be wrong in order for me to be right. So for a very long time, scientists have told themselves that the creation stories, specifically the one in the Bible, right, that they contradict evolution, they contradict science, and we can't trust them because it means that God just created something without any mutation, evolvement, or whatever. But nothing in the Bible creation story actually tells you this. Nothing tells you that. As a matter of fact, if you were to go and read that Bible, Genesis 1 and 21 being one of the first verses that said it, it said God created, right, things after their kind, right, and that they populated. Verse 21, verse 24, verse 25 consistently tells you that they created the beast of the field and all of these things after their kind, or after his kind. So it doesn't mean that God created everything one by one by one by one. He said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures. That's what that Christian Bible says. But we tell ourselves this lie about all of this in order to, and stick with me, because we're going to pack it all up tonight. We tell ourselves this lie in order for us to feel established, validated, appeased. And these lies are eating at the fabric of our logic. These lies are the things that make us not to see things as different. Because we cannot correlate evolution, DNA, science with the stories told and written by the ancients who came before, we create lies that have marginalized and hit our society and make us make very bad decisions. We lie about the multiracial myth. What is race? Every person on this planet is a person of mixed heritage by their definition of race. When you look at what Johann Friedrich Blublock put out, he classified humans into 5 races, and he based them on physical characteristics that he thought made them different. And he stratified the existence of man to put Caucasians at the top. People like Johann Friedrich Blumenbach knew what they were doing. They knew that they were leaning to scientific bias, but they based it on theories that were close to the Bible, but more associated with the idea of science because they saw themselves as men of science. These same theories have caused genocides in Africa, the Nazis against the Jews, in Bosnia. These ideas have manipulated man and have made him see himself as something different. As when he compares himself to someone, he has to put himself above someone. It's created stratified thought. But where does this come from? Where does this come from? And so tonight, I'm going to really kind of go into this. Because when we move beyond special creation, then we have to get into the philosophy of it. We have to get into those who helped to create this madness in this world, and those who we still study, who we still validate. Those names who are mentioned to us, some famous, some not, that we accept as knowledgeable people and experts, philosophers, educators, preachers, teachers. And these lies that are still permeating through our society. The first of these types of people, let's hit the first one today, right? Maybe you'll recognize this person. Maybe you won't. Not by face. He just looks like another Greek, right? Just another artistic, example of someone. But who is this? This is Aristotle. I know you've heard the name Aristotle. I know you have in school somebody mentioned Aristotle as they mentioned Plato, right? Aristotle was considered a genius. From 384 BC to 322 BC, Aristotle was a genius of that world. But we don't know much about Aristotle. The things we know is what he wrote. We follow it by his writings. But he was a genius. We have been taught that he was a genius in natural science and philosophy, economics, politics, psychology. And he left an indelible example on this earth. He was the instructor and the mentor of Alexander the Great, who conquered what was then at that time the modern world. He was respected. He was venerated. But here's the thing. Aristotle was crazy. Now, I'm not saying that to make some kind of lunatic statement. I'm telling you, he was crazy. Aristotle justified cruelty, manipulation. He wrote in his philosophies, as we talk about him as being this great ancient Greek philosopher, but one of his major philosophies was the natural master and natural slave. Aristotle believed that man had natural masters and they had natural slaves, and that this was acceptable. He justified it. He believed that this was natural because it was the way that the world worked. He was an early proponent of what I call erratic evolution. He considered that when you are the property of a master, you should stay in your place. You should not seek to be highly educated. You should not come outside of your status. He believed that slavery was a natural phenomenon and that those of a certain class and race, because they tell you, oh, they didn't see race back then, deserve to be in that state. He wrote that slaves should stay that way because they provided leisure. They provided the essential welfare of the state. They kept the state running. They were the ones who put the work in, and they needed to be guided in the way you would guide a horse. And that the slave could share the virtues of the master. Now, we could argue that at the time, Aristotle wasn't talking about chattel slavery. That meant everything in that slave and all of its children, all of its projects would still be enslaved. But he thought that slavery was a virtuous thing. Aristotle believed that this is the way that the world should work. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. We still follow Aristotle. We still listen to his ideas on philosophy, on geology, the arts. We venerate him because we consider him to be a genius. Now, we ignore the horrific things that came from his philosophy. We ignore his precursor of evolution that inspired men like Darwin and others. Because, see, in the end of the day, what we're really looking to do is to create an understanding academically that pushes us outside of this merger of faith and knowledge. Remember earlier, I told you that as long as we make special creation, which man is a special creation, he is unique. I don't have to make that up scientifically. I can look at the DNA of man compared to all of the animals on the planet. He is unique. But therein lies another lie that we have been told that has fed us and pushed us into a state of lunacy and foolery again. I want to speak to you about another man, a man who inspired Darwin, right? And basically comes from a very, very questionable background. But many of us don't understand how these types of men inspired. Before I bring this person up, though, I want us to look at some of his work, right? I want us to look at some of his work because I think that is so important for us to understand these things. I'm sorry, I was trying to bring this up and it gave me a little bit of an error, but we're going to get into this tonight. All right, let me see if I can bring the actual picture up. When you want something to open, it decides it doesn't want to. But I'll tell you this. So the band's name is Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel. Now, don't be surprised if you've never heard the name Ernst Haeckel, right? Maybe you haven't. He's a complete unknown to you. But here's the funny part. A lot of the men who created these theories, right? A lot of them being German and European, their forte was not what they wrote their philosophies or theories about, right? Haeckel was an anatomist, but his specialty was in embryology, right? But he was a huge advocate of Charles Darwin. And he was famous for his step-by-step growth of how animals, humans, embryos, and everything related in the modern world. Right? Haeckel was one of these people who went about creating charts and methodologies to show you, right, how things worked. He truly believed himself to be a genius. And a lot of the things that Haeckel did, and I'm going to bring up one right now, I finally was able to get this to act right, may seem a little confusing to you at first look, but we're going to get into it. I'm going to explain it to you. Right? Here it is right here. This is Haeckel's, right, phylogenetic tree. You may say to yourself, well, what does this mean, Eddie? Why do I care about the phylogenetic tree? Well, what he tried to do, this is his original tree. But what Haeckel tried to do was to share with us a way of how man interacts with the world. Now, here's the thing. There is truth and lies and some of the things that Haeckel, right, he shared. But he wasn't the first one to do this. He was the one who added animals, right, and other things to the chart. He was the one who decided that man had to be added in here. And this was the justification that eventually led us to evolution, to Darwinism, which has been bastardized and has been treated and done in a way that is so horrible that we are confused on what evolution is. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something right now. If you are joining us on Facebook, I have noticed that Facebook is having a problem in putting out a lot of our comments. So if you are joining us via Facebook and we don't see you in here commenting, please try to join us on YouTube. Just look for the Erudition Network. You will see our symbol and go in that way. Whatever is going on with StreamYard and Facebook has caused somewhat of a problem. And I noticed yesterday that we started to see these issues. I know that Facebook is working on it, but this has been an issue. But if you want to comment, please go on YouTube, or make sure you have given StreamYard the permission on your Facebook pages in order so us to see your comments live here on the show, or I won't see them until we get off of the program. So please, the best way to do it would probably be just to go and join us on YouTube. So that picture may look a little confusing. So let's go and look at another breakdown picture here. This is Haeckel, And we'll get later on into Robert Whitaker. But here's the thing. You will see that he wrote General Morphology and Organism, and he proposed the four kingdoms. He proposed this idea of how things feed out. Later on in 1969, another ecologist named Robert Whitaker, he went in and added more. And this may not seem like of any importance to you all, but the reality of it is and it goes along with the idea of what we said earlier about God, right? About the biblical creation story and how God gave dominion to man. And they put animal at the top, and man is considered an animal on their table. But if we go and look at what is being put out modernly, because these philosophies are still being used, taught in school, right? We're still seeing the phylogenetic tree in everything in order to teach genetics. So let's share a more up-to-date. You will see that here we are. They call it the tree of life now because, it's very hard to say phylogenetic. So let's just say the tree of life. And let's see how organisms and everything place into the status of how man works, right? The evolutionary relationship. Now, again, you may say, well, why is this important? Because what they're actually trying to say is, right, that man and every creature on this planet, right, was designed from this planet, and they share a tree. They share a connection. There is absolutely nothing wrong scientifically with that statement. Man, even by the creation story, was made out of dirt, out of clay, and he was breathed in life. So we know that man does have a connection with earth. We know by DNA that everything on this earth has an origination, an organism, and so this is fine. Where we start to run into the problems is how man evolved. See, when we get out of the idea, as I told you earlier when we started the program tonight, if we get out of the idea of special creation, of man being different and the way he thinks, the way he operates, and the way he is on this earth, and we get into the Aristotle idea and the Darwin idea and the Lyell idea and the Mendel idea, we start to lose our way. We start to forget that a lot of the people who created these thought processes, these theories, I just told you Aristotle believed in stratification and slavery. He believed in intellectual denial. He believed in subjugation. He thought that was based on the natural order of things. He thought it was based on this tree of life, which should not surprise anyone who's biblically studied, because that tree of life has a meaning even in Genesis, but that's what they call it. The reality is that there is truth mixed with lies here. There's foolery and fallacy in the mix here, where we touch on truths, but we mix them up with lies. Looking at those tables that many people have no idea. They take it for the fact that what there is being said is just what it is, because this is what we're being taught in our schools. This is what your children at different levels now, but this is what they're being taught. And no questions are being asked on why do people think this way? Why do people believe this? Men who sat here and created the ape mentality Men like Gregor Mendel, who many of you may not know. But Gregor Mendel is important because around 1822, before Darwin, he suggested that races had to become separate species. And then he also went on to say that Africans, blacks, were closer to monkeys than anybody. And that the evolution of man was monkey, black, white. And that they, by definition, are the better. They are the Homo sapiens. You are the monkey. You are the hominid. You are something different. People like Gregor Mendel believed this and taught this. And because I believe in putting a face to a name, that is why I'm sharing these pictures with you tonight. This man was nothing special, but that philosophy resonated with people who thought themselves to be enlightened. You know, our forefathers who helped to create America, they thought themselves to be enlightened. And we don't realize that Gregor Mendel's work was being read by Nazis. So a man who was writing in the mid to late 1800s, his philosophies and thoughts inspired another generation of murderers and killers who started to believe in the development, right, and the rise of men who were above or specialized. And they created tables, examples, illustrations that they shared in their books, that they shared with everyone to suggest that evolution came with many different names. And people often forget Darwin didn't come up with evolution. Matter of fact, Darwin sat on the theory of evolution for decades. He was afraid to put it out. And he only put it out because of Lyell. And we'll get into him in a minute. Who advised him that you need to do this in order to own the product. That's what he told him. In order to own the philosophy. But this is how these men believed the world evolved. So when you're out here preaching evolution as a unthought about, just suggested thought, and you argue with people and you tell them, let's understand the issues with evolution, not as a theory, because I believe man does evolve in order to survive, in order to maintain his place in this world, but not in the way that has been taught to us. Not in the way that we have been taught that we are monkeys, that we are descendants from creatures and apes. When Darwin in himself, in his own book, In Origin of Species, never said this. Darwin talked about natural and artificial selection. He talked about stronger species being able to survive. And what he meant by a species, he was wrong. What he meant was characteristics. A person in Africa with darker skin and the melanin could survive in sun. A person who was albino, had still suffered from albinism, or was lighter in skin or white, would have problems surviving in an extremely hot environment. So they would have to move into an environment which was more fitting for them. Next week, I may be get into DNA, because I believe that, I think Pastor Ray's and a couple of people asked me to talk about that. But let's understand the lie that you see on your screen right now, and look from A to F and how they distinguish themselves as being something different. Something different. And how many of us have been taught and we believe everything that we hear, and probably don't do much thought into who these people are, right? Who they were, what they were, what was their purposes. I asked you to share this program tonight. I wanted a discussion tonight, because if you don't know these people, if you don't know where the information comes from, then you just accept it as fact. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you right now, that's foolery. That's my word for it. You don't accept it. You don't even accept what I say tonight as just fact. Go look these men up. You know for a fact at the end of this, I'm going to drop in here names and places and books and things for you to go look at to grow your mind. Because we have to do better. We have to think better. We cannot get lost in the lunacy of the day. Let's get into this other diabolical person, right? Because I do believe that this man was diabolical. And here's the thing. Charles Darwin said most of his work on evolution can be, half of it can be contributed to this man. And you may not even know who he is. You might look at this and, oh, that's just an old man from back in the day. He's sitting in a chair. What's his importance? Who is he? This man right here is Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell thought himself a expert in the science of natural laws. He has influenced a lot of the present day scientific observations. He is the one who Darwin greatly agreed with. He corresponded with Darwin for years. He shaped Darwin's scientific processes and life. He shaped the thought of people from late 1700 all the way into the 1900s. If you want to go read a book that shows you the lunacy, yet accept the truth, read Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell. He aimed to show us that by volcano eruptions, by the way earthquakes, how the earth changes, right? He didn't want to believe that things happen because of a sudden catastrophe, even though we've later figured out that that can happen. Not comets hitting the planet, any of this. He believed that things happened, right? because they happened over time. And it's that philosophy that inspired Darwin. Here's the thing, though. Lau was a bigot. Lau was a bigot, a racist. He was another person who believed in the natural order of man being white men were given authority over this planet to rule over those who had originally been beasts. That meant the Asian, that meant the black, that meant anyone that was not white. He was so afraid of people finding that he was incorrect that he actually wrote to Darwin in one letter telling him that you should do as I do and never accept any scientific placement. Avoid it. Stay away from it. People always argue about how Darwin stayed away. He was an introvert. He was a hermit, and he didn't interact with people. But they don't realize that he was told to do that by his mentor. He was afraid, and he wrote that if people were to delve into what he was doing, they would cry out against him. So he didn't want to be exposed, but he did want to be respected. When Darwin says that more than half of his evolution theory can come from a man who saw others as below, that makes you have to question, where does the theory of evolution, how does that go in alignment with other races as they created? None of this is made up. That's who Lau was. You know, he came over to the Americas during the time of slavery. And he greatly praised, just like Aristotle, the enslavement of blacks. As a matter of fact, just like Aristotle, he believed in the denial of education for those who were under whites. Let's not let them think on their own. Let's not let them be wise. He was so afraid of the issues surrounding blacks, black slaves in America, that he said he worried about the slave owners. He felt that they were outnumbered and that the abolitionists, who were a minority, and their books endangered their authority given by nature over the slaves. His actual words, because I wrote it down, whites being outnumbered by the darker skinned people begins with them being owned, and even agreed, and I agree, that the abolitionist books ought to be banned from the slave owning classes to have safety. When you look at the picture that I had up earlier of the monkey and the evolutionary process, I want you to consider Lyle. I want you to think about what he taught. I want you to consider these things that these men taught to the world that we still accept, that are still in our books in minute ways, slickly put there for us to not be able to catch on to the little intricacies that are being put out. The monkey man. When I brought up the table earlier, that confusing table, right, that everybody saw when I pulled up on Earth Haeckel. And people say, well, how does that represent us today? Well, here we are, a century and decades past what a lot of these men put out. And how does that affect us? How does that show anything to us right now? So I'm going to go through this slide because I think this was a slide, right? Yes, this is it. A couple of months ago, I was teaching this lesson, and I was showing you all migration. And I was showing you how the ape and early man, consider the things I've already shown you tonight. And telling you that Darwin wasn't the first one to do this. Darwin was the one to put it in a book. He was already a wealthy man to legitimize it because Darwin came from a respected family. But no one talks about Abu Altman al-Jais, whose difference was, right? He taught about the survival of the fittest as a philosophy and how man passed on traits, which I talked about earlier, things in which man, color of the hair, eye color, things like that. But we're talking about a completely different thing when we start talking about Darwin's evolutionary and Haeckel and all of these people's thoughts. But look at this tree. Remember the tree I showed you earlier? The tree of life? Right? You know, the tree with that very, very complicated name, the phylogenetic tree. So as Darwinism talks about this tree, this is where that baseline comes from. But no one talks about the fact that Haeckel, who created this idea of the tree, he put at the top of his tree Homo sapiens, white men. In the mix of that with blacks and whatever, who we call Homo stupidus. Right? Which was basically his definition of saying a true but ignorant man. So as we start getting to Pithecanthropus, Australopithecus, all of these different ideas was just to justify racism. Most all of these men were racist. Not because it was the period of time that they lived in, but because that was their motivation to prove that they were superior. There's another man named Buffon in the mid-1700s. And his philosophy was that God created separate human species. There were many atoms. Because we don't know these people or these things, our country has, and our world is still suffering from it. This lack of education, this lack of understanding. It's what led to genocide. This is what led to eugenics, where people saw themselves as something else. Earlier, I pulled up a picture, and I did not get back into it. And as we're coming down to the end of this hour, I want to touch on this real quick. There's another man, modern, that I want to talk about. And a lot of the reason why I want to talk about this is because we're still seeing this madness today. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you heard about the Supreme Court pushing away or repealing affirmative action and saying that schools should not have to be forced to make sure that other cultures have a higher attendance or ability to be able to attend schools. But everybody who I've talked about here come from an academic background. Every one of these men were considered experts, even to Aristotle's time, in their fields of understanding. You've heard me talk about many people who have lied to us for years. One of the last people that I want to talk about before we go off the program tonight is a man named Robert Whitaker. Now, Robert Whitaker could be considered a very diminutive guy, not someone that you really need to be concerned about or care about, right? But following a long line of biased, bigoted people, he also came up, right, with theories and ideas that are still affecting us today. Right? Robert Whitaker believed that the world, he was an ecologist, and he believed that the world would suffer, right, because of what he associated with the tree of life. And his belief was that there was not enough food or resources in the world. So it may sound familiar to where we are right now in the world to sustain man. And he added to Haeckel, who we've discussed, his tree. He showed how man was using up all of these resources. He believed in by country population control. He was inspired by another man named Thomas Malthus, who you can go look up. He was inspired by this man. Malthus wrote a book called The Principles of Population. This book lays the groundwork for what later would become genocides in Nazi Germany, genocides in Africa, with the understanding that we must contain the population by law, abortion, sterilizations, medical experimentation, euthanasia. He believed it. And he justified it from a scientific background. He followed in line with his heroes like Charles Lyell and even Darwin's philosophies. He took all of this and put it together to make. Now, he had no idea. He had no idea of the real science. He was a sociologist by theories. And he added different things to the tree to justify his racist revolutionary thought. He justified his ideas on the words of a madman named Thomas Malthus. We're looking at a society right now. This is not just about man's evolution into other things. They took this to a political, philosophical, spiritual level to affect the thought processes of all of us, even to this day. They taught this in academia. And now that we have people of color in academia who challenge this, we say, no, let's not make it so easy for them to get into school, because this changes the thought process. Black women, you've heard me say this many times before, are the most educated people in this country. They go to school more than anybody. They have degrees, doctorates. They are affecting science, philosophy, thought. And that can't happen, because that doesn't go along with what we talked about on this episode tonight. It doesn't go along with the patriarchy and the evolution of man. That was a lot to unpack tonight. A lot to unpack. And I'm going to close this episode by telling you something. Coming up here very soon, the Erudition Network will be putting out an early world history course. One of the days in the course goes through a complete lesson and visual. I couldn't give you everything tonight. And it talks to you about how we got to where we are, how life started on this planet, both by their theory and what even came before their theories. And one of the things that we're trying very hard to do here is to make the course available for you. There are people there are folks out here who will charge you thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars, to teach you what is called orthodox, as my wife says it, history. What we're teaching you here is not just unorthodox. It's hidden, hasn't been discussed. You probably haven't seen these faces that we showed you tonight, or these tables that we showed you tonight, anywhere. But we're going to give this information to you in a way that you can digest it with your family. You can teach it and watch it on your own. That's my goal, to reach a larger audience so that we can start to educate ourselves better. Please make plans and keep an eye on what we're doing here. I think my son said on our show yesterday, change is coming. Changes are coming. And we need your help and we need your support. I see again that I happen to not put our banner up here. And I'm bad at that throughout this entire episode tonight. And if I missed your comments on Facebook, because I didn't see many comments tonight, I do apologize. I will go back and I will look at it and I will drop some of these names that I mentioned tonight in our chats and in our thing, so you all can go look them up for yourself, or you can watch the video and definitely go look up these names on your own. But I want us to learn. So I said the other day that I was going to let you all know we're going to present a course to you at a very reasonable cost. And I want you to take that as our commitment to teaching over price. There are courses out here, I'm telling you, that are just seminars charging you hundreds of dollars. Yesterday, I put out what the cost of an undergraduate, just some vocational course, will cost you for African American studies. We're not going to do that. There was in the thousands. You're going to learn more from what we're getting ready to offer you than any of those. I guarantee you. And we're going to do it as a pre-release so that those of you who follow us, get early access to it, to vet the course, see how it affects you. This is coming. This has to happen. But I've come to my hour. I'm actually 5 minutes over my hour. I hope you got something from this lesson tonight. I hope some of these names stuck out to you. If not, when the course comes, you will see these names again. You will see these men again, and you could get more in depth in who they are and how they affect you and how you can challenge what is being taught as just orthodox or regular study without any questioning, without any empirical thought. Our goal is to get you to think. But I am going to get out of here. Yes, Eric, I'm very excited about it too. It's been a lot of long nights trying to get this done. I believe in education and teaching. And if you don't think that I'm read enough in Darwinism, this is one of the books on Darwin that I have. This is The Original Origin of Species. But reading and trying to break these things down is so important. We got to know. They're taking things away from you. They're telling you can't learn in the way you used to learn. In your history, in your science, in your math. Now they're telling you who's going to be able to go to school unchallenged. We got to start looking at these things, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you black, white, it doesn't matter. I believe in teaching history to its facts and its honesty, not made up, ambiguous thought. We need to learn. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you, Teddy, for the background. If you want to support the Erudition Network as we move forward, hey, there's our Cash App right down here. Please support us. I will be on Saturday. I got a request today. We're going to do a wrap up on Saturday. So some of these things, if you didn't get a chance to talk about, we'll be on briefly. I will say briefly, I came on last week about 30 minutes. I try to make those things brief. If we don't get folks to come on and ask questions, I know Saturdays are sometimes busy, but as we approach the 4th, next week, in this new course that we're getting ready to put out, I want you to start sharing the program. Share the program. Share the program. Share the program. Get these programs shared. Support Tina on Monday. Support the boys on Wednesday, and what we do here on Thursday, and even our wrap up on Saturday. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna get out of here. I really love this lesson tonight. Please share it. I hope someone gets something from it. Drop some comments in here if you did get something. I'm not seeing all the comments, so hey, just drop it, and we definitely will get back to you. But until next time, have a blessed and wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.